Welcome to the Authoritative Approach. My name is Allie Marie, and this is where love and boundaries meet. Today, I'm joined with Asher Manning, who is a transgender individual who has very willingly shared a lot of their experiences with me about their process into getting to where they are, helping me understand an alternate perspective to the Catholic perspective that I have held for so many years. And so, Asher, I just want to thank you for coming on and chatting with me today.
Yeah, it's absolutely no problem. So, hello everyone. I'm a little bit new to this, so I apologize. But my name is Asher Zephyr Manning. I am a transgender queer man. My pronouns are he, him, and they, them, and I am so honored to be talking right now. So, very excited.
So, you speak a bit on behalf of the transgender community, correct?
Yeah, I try to use my voice to uplift the entire community because it's a big one, So,
What types of topics do you typically cover? What forms of events? Just because I'm so far removed, I think. Like what types of events do you speak at, and what kind of like topics? What are some of the names of the speeches that you've given before?
So most of the stuff is done through social media. So I have done stuff through TikTok and everything. So that way, because usually it's easier to reach out through social media platforms. But recently, I also did a talk at my school. It was called a True Life Talk. And I gave a talk about my experience being on a religiously affiliated college campus and how my queerness and being transgender kind of affected that. I ended up being in our school newspaper as well, in the Crier, which was through St. Anselm College. And through a lot of these different conversations, I mainly try to speak on the topic of not only just respecting transgender people, respecting their identity, their pronouns, whatever. I also try to talk about the mental health effects that can come into play, where if you don't respect their gender, if you don't respect their identity, because not a lot of people think about that. So I try to incorporate all of that so that way it's not just me talking about my story, it's me also advocating for all the people out there who understand and who have had to go through mental health struggles or just general struggles with accepting themselves and having other people accept them. So it's kind of like an all in one. I try to encompass everything instead of it just being my story, it's everyone's.
You reached out after you saw my No Hate Like Christian Love series on YouTube. And when I initially posted about how, sex is designed for a biological man and woman. And I'm kind of going into, there's that TikTok trend where everyone was saying controversial things. And I'm just basically saying, like, this isn't homophobic. This isn't transphobic. This is like, we just hold different philosophies in life, but it's not inherently disrespectful to hold these fundamental beliefs. And you've been very open with discussing everything surrounding that with me. And so I wanted to ask, for you in your journey, how did your transition kind of like come about then? Did you begin with more of a social transition and then you shifted into more, I don't even know what your process has looked like here recently as far as medications or anything might go, and please share whatever you're comfortable with sharing. But like, I guess at what age did you finally decide that you wanted the social transition? How were you introduced to the topic of, oh, I don't have to identify as my parents have called me my whole life, and I can shift this? How are you introduced to that concept and then choose to pursue it?
So it started honestly back in high school because, especially during my freshman year, because prior to that, I had never really been exposed to anything regarding the LGBTQ plus community. I knew of the name, I knew of the community. That was about as far as it went. But then when I reached high school, I met people who were a part of the LGBTQ plus community. And by interacting with them and kind of learning more about it, I realized that, like, there may be something to this. Like, I may be within this community. None of those people like gave me ideas or made me think I was gay or whatever, but they kind of showed me that it's okay to be open and explore and look into this. Like, it's fine. So throughout my freshman and sophomore year, mainly, it was just a time of questioning. It was just a period of, what do I identify as? Who do I like? Who do I love? What are my needs? And by junior year, I had kind of figured out, okay, I think I'm on like the bisexual, pansexual spectrum. I fall somewhere in there. And then gender started coming into play because I was like, the more I'm thinking about it, I've never really been comfortable in this body. I'm still not comfortable in this body. Something's going on. So I started doing research into different forms of gender expression and identity. And at first I was like, maybe I'm non-binary because, I've always kind of been like a tomboy. But then the more digging that I did, I was like, all of this is kind of lining up with being transgender, not just non-binary. So by my senior year, I started slowly kind of talking to my friends about it. And I would be like, hey, can you call me by this name and use these pronouns instead of what you used to call me by? I just want to see how it feels. And by doing that very slowly and periodically, I started to realize I feel comfortable or more comfortable using this name and these pronouns, not my dead name and my old pronouns. Then the summer before my freshman year of college, I reached out to my dean, who had no clue who I was, and I had no clue who he was. And I talked to him and I said, hey, I'm a transgender student. Is there any way where we can get my name changed in the system to be Asher? I don't know what he managed to do, but he managed to change my name, my email. I got my ID changed. So since I've been in college, I've been very open and very public. So I would say that my social transition probably started around like the summer before my senior year / my entire senior year, because that was when I was slowly working it into kind of like my everyday name, my everyday pronouns. But since I've been here on campus, I have been completely open with who I am. We had a wonderful speaker come during our freshman orientation. And during that time, she had given us this wheel, and it was basically like what makes up your identity, like race, ethnicity, everything like that. And one of the things was sexual identity and gender. And in front of the entire class of 2025, where no one knows me literally whatsoever, I stood up, I announced my name, said I was transgender and queer, and gave them my pronouns. So the entire class of 2025 knew from that moment on, I was like a very openly queer person. And it's been like that pretty much since day one, and it continues to be like that to this day.
How did the conversations go with your parents? Were they like, yeah, how did all of that go?
I also grew up in a very Catholic family, so it definitely was, I don't want to say a disappointment. I want to say it was a shock because they were just like, oh, that's not what we expected. Because when I first came out as bisexual and pansexual, they were like, well, you're kind of young. Give us some time. Try to figure it out because this might just be a phase. You hear that all the time. It's just a phase. So I give us some time. I'm still bisexual, pansexual, whatever. And then when I came out as transgender, that completely blew my parents out of the water because they were like, where is this coming from? And I'm like, look at the past. Look at me, how much I've been a tomboy my entire life. We cannot be surprised. So it definitely was difficult for them. I think especially difficult for my dad because, daddy's little girl. I was his little princess. He liked to spoil me and he still loves me. He doesn't care. But it's still difficult for them to wrap their brain around the fact that I am transgender and they still use she, her pronouns. They still call me by my dead name, but it's just something I've had to live with because they are older. They were raised in a very Catholic upbringing where it wasn't as lax as mine was or understanding. So I can't really give them a hard time because despite everything, they also have defended me against other family members who have been completely unaccepting. So I give them a little bit more leeway just because they are trying to understand. It's just taking them a very long time.
That's one of the things that I enjoy talking about a lot on my YouTube channel is I think, right? The different philosophies between you have reason and emotion and reason, which is more important? Is it the experience or is it the physicality and all of these different pieces? And one of the things that has kind of come up to me, you talked about not feeling comfortable in your body. And I think that can go so true in so many different ways, right? Like, I don't know that anybody is ever totally comfortable in their body at all times, right? Like I'm pregnant with twins right now. I have a fairly large, like, I stand up and show you this belly going on, but you know, like it's not exactly comfortable. I wouldn't describe it as comfortable, but you know, it's something that I kind of like push through because I'm like, okay, the end goal is going to give me, there's an outcome that I can anticipate. And so I guess like where, because there's like a difference between, if I'm like asking, right? So there, my understanding would be that there's a difference between gender dysphoria and body dysmorphia, right? Those are two different things. And so if biological sex and gender are considered to be like, the biological sex is the physicality and the gender is more of the experience. What do I experience, right? And so if they are so different, like where does, I guess, I don't know how to phrase my question exactly. What if some people are led to want to change their biological sex or go on puberty blockers or cross hormones or something like that, and it ends up having negative repercussions when they weren't ever truly experiencing body dysmorphia, but it was actually more of like a gender dysphoria? Like, why do biological sex and gender have to match, I guess?
So it's absolutely possible for somebody to go on medication, get surgery, whatever, and have it go either horribly wrong, or they realize afterwards, oh crap, I made a mistake, like I didn't want to do this. So it's absolutely possible. And some people do realize after the fact that, these two things do not match. I had one and not the other. And it's definitely hard to kind of figure out what it is because of how close body dysmorphia and body dysphoria is. Usually you're able to kind of separate the two, but sometimes, like in my case, you have both. So then you really don't know which one is coming into play. Um, I would say that typically with a body dysmorphia situation, it's usually related to an eating disorder of some kind or some kind of other issue that may have come from a very young childhood and just continue to grow. Body dysphoria is typically something that you have. From what I've heard from other transgender people, it's something that you can kind of acknowledge from a very young age. It's kind of this acknowledgement in like the back of your head that like something is on my body that I don't like and I don't want it to be there. And it has nothing to do with body dysmorphia. There is a part that is on me that is related to my biological sex that I don't like. And every transgender person out there, or I would like to say like a good majority of us acknowledge that like we cannot change our biological sex. Scientifically, it is impossible. We can take hormones, we can do, surgeries and everything like that. We acknowledge that we can do all that we can, but it's never going to change the biological sex, and that will always be a struggle because it's just physically impossible. But that is also why we are trying to almost like destigmatize this idea that biological sex and gender are the same thing, because for so long so many people thought they're the exact same thing, and they're not, because gender has always been a form of, so it's a social construct. It always has been. It's how you're able to distinguish from the manly man to the very feminine woman. So, and there's really always been that struggle of finding the in between, the androgynous or anything like that. And anybody who typically went outside of that gender norm that's been implemented throughout history was often seen as an outcast. So now we are trying our best to destigmatize that and show it's okay if you're leaning one way or the other way, or if you're smack dab in the middle. So it's not necessarily that they're the same thing. It's just that they've been seen as the same thing for so many years that now it's hard to pull it apart and show people, hey, it's not the same. Biological sex is one thing, gender is another. So, and scientists have also come out and tried to explain it, but there are just some people out there who just simply can't grasp the concept because they've just been so intertwined throughout basically the entirety of history.
I feel like a lot of people will say, like, they'll say, I'll call somebody by the sex that they appear as, right? And so I know that, sometimes with non-binary, it's very clear that they're non-binary. They might, look like a man and be wearing makeup and feminine clothing, and it's just very clear. It's like, okay, you're non-binary, and that is what it is. And I guess that's where it comes down to, for me, that question of, okay, why does that the gender and biological, I guess maybe because I'm hung up on feeling inclined toward pronouns identifying with biological sex, which, you know, as we kind of talked about, I'm like, it's not transphobic. It's just simply a philosophy. It's not, you know, and I think that you had agreed. You must.
Yeah, it's very difficult. So, like, if someone sees me, if I were to walk out of my dorm right now in the outfit that I was wearing, and someone saw me from across campus, they would think that's a girl right there with just really short hair. And I acknowledge that because I still have a very feminine body. On the outside, looking in, people would assume pronouns are she, her. That's just how it works. Like I said, since I've been open, some people are aware that I use he, him, they, them, but I can understand the struggle. And some people will be like, hey, actually, I go by these pronouns, but others will just be too afraid to say anything for fear of the repercussions. So, you know, we say don't assume everyone's pronouns. Typically, we're kind of trying to move in a direction now of just using like the gender neutral of like they, them until someone corrects you. But because it's always just been call someone the pronouns that they appear as for centuries, you know, that's just kind of what's realistically going to happen. It's not the best solution because some people will be affected by it more than others on a mental, you know, in like a mental way because it can hurt them. But it's going to take a long time for that idea of just use they them across the board to really kind of stick. And I think a lot of people recognize that. We know it's going to be difficult, but and we acknowledge that it's not going to be fair for everyone within the transgender community or underneath the transgender umbrella, but it's a reality that we have to face. Not everyone is going to be able to figure out if you're a she, her, a they, them, a he, him, or whatever, you know? So it's kind of like we want it to be this way, but if we look at it realistically, it's going to be this way.
I think a lot about the yin and yang symbol.
Mm-hmm.
And, you know, yin is representative of the feminine and yang is representative of the masculine, and how it's the black and the white, but then there's also a white within the black and the black dot within the white. And it's that there is this intermingling of androgyny, as you had stated, within all of us. We're all on a spectrum of where, you know, how much testosterone do we have, how much estrogen do we have. My levels are higher than the average woman, so I have more body hair and whatever else, you know, dark hair doesn't help me either with the fair skin. But so I guess for me, in my experiences, it's been more along the lines of, this is just like my physicality, like even hormones. I would think hormones to some degree define gender. I mean, when a woman is on her cycle and she's having her period, right, and she has more estrogen, she gets more cranky, or she's, you know, the whole PMS stuff starts coming up. And so it's almost like hormones can influence gender, which seems like that comes back to biological sex again, to a certain degree, or like a biological function, which, you know, in my particular video about biological sex being designed, or sex being designed for a biological man and woman, I had mentioned birth control. And one of the reasons that the church doesn't support birth control is just because of how bad the artificial hormones are for the environment, right? Like, we're discharging all those hormones through our urine and everything else, and it goes to the sewage and to the rivers, and it's winding back up in our drinking water. And there are all these complications just with hormones in general. And I guess for me, like, when I think about taking care of the earth, specifically from a Catholic perspective, you know, like, I'm caring for something that was created for us to like dwell on, and I'm caring for something that belongs to somebody else. It doesn't belong to me. Like, I've never taken birth control, and that was one of the reasons why. It was because it was like, I don't want to have more artificial hormones. But you know, it can go for prescription drugs. It goes kind of across the board. There's this whole thing of like, how far is too far? What can we integrate in? What can we not? You know, it's not like this targeted thing. But it seems to me that hormones to a certain degree would influence gender identity and how we experience our bodies.
Mm-hmm. So, for me personally, I also have a higher level of testosterone than what's to be expected. I think it also played into the reason why it was a lot easier for me to drop my voice naturally, because I'm not on any testosterone as of right now. I'm not on any medication for that. So, everything I have done is either done through a physical change, like cutting my hair, doing makeup, whatever, wearing a binder. And when it comes to my voice, I trained myself to make it sound deeper. So And a lot of, and pretty much people within the transgender community who do go on, hormones, whether estrogen or testosterone, it kind of acknowledge it's a way to shift the hormones that they were basically born with, So, if you were born, let's say, female, and then you transition to male, you acknowledge that by taking that testosterone, you're making sure that your testosterone levels are higher. So that way you appear to be as if your biological sex from the very beginning was male, but you also fully acknowledge that, like, okay, biological sex was female, but I am changing it now. I am changing those levels to make it appear as if it's always been male. But like I said, there's always that knowledge in the back of pretty much anyone who is transgender or under the transgender umbrella. We acknowledge what the biological sex is. We acknowledge how those hormones came into play, whether testosterone or estrogen. We acknowledge that those come into play when it comes to our biological sex. The most we can do is try to increase one to make the other not as obvious. That's pretty much all that we're doing. And you either do that through gel, pills, shots, whatever your method of it is. That's really all that you're doing. It's just to make it look as if I've always been this way, even though I know personally it's always been this way. So it's just one way to easiest way to describe it is one way to increase the levels of the thing that you want more of. So in my case, it would be to increase the levels of testosterone, and then just kind of like keep the estrogen like where it's at.
I hear you talk about chest binders and things like that, and I just think about what, because obviously there's right, so it's back to that fundamental kind of like almost like into a philosophy of experience versus physicality, because the experience that you would have from that is that, oh, now I have a flatter chest, I feel less womanly, all of these different things. But then when I think about it as a massage therapist, craniosacral somato-emotional release therapist, I'm like, you have so much lymphatic fluid through there. There are hundreds of lymph nodes through your breasts, and when you're binding them, your lymph fluid's not able to move properly. I would imagine that would increase risk for, potentially even breast cancer, different things like that when you're restricting the flow. I mean, because even bras are studied to have negative effects on breasts for that particular reason. So when I think about like a binder, or for those that choose to pursue that, I just wonder like how much is it just it's a constant like weighing pro and con type of thing.
Yeah, so when it comes to binding, there are specific companies out there for transgender people that make the binders. And when they do make binders, and this is also spread throughout the transgender community, there are rules that go along with wearing a binder, or rules that you should follow. So for example, if you have never binded before, or never wore a binder, never used, because we also have binding tape and stuff like that. If you've never done any of that before, you do not wear it for the full day. You wear it for like half a day at the most, because your body is completely not used to it. And then as you continue, you can slowly move up to wearing a binder for a full day, for example. But we're not saying like the full 24 hours. We're saying like you wake up at 8 a.m. in the morning, you take it off at like 10 p.m. at night. So, because you should not be sleeping in a binder. That is completely unsafe. You could restrict your breathing. And even with me now, as someone who's been wearing a binder since, gosh, senior year of high school, I think, it still is a struggle. Absolutely. And it definitely has affected my body and my chest. And I fully am aware of that, because I can see it. I can see that something has changed. And while part of it makes it easier to bind, you also have that knowledge in the back of your head that, like, this could be unsafe. And I ended up, because of everything that I was going through, and because it was kind of starting to get to be at a point where it was painful, I ended up kind of switching between wearing like sports bras and just like looser t-shirts, and then just wearing binders on certain days. So because it was just getting to the point of like, I can't breathe anymore, and at this point I don't care, but that was my personal decision. Some other people just stick through the struggle. It's not only difficult being transgender on like a mental health part, it's also difficult on a physical health part, because you are taking a lot of risk with what you want to do to change your body, whether or not you decide to go the medical route or not.
Which leads me to wonder, I was on a live on TikTok once for somebody who was transgender, and they had on their computer, or maybe it was a picture frame that went through gender affirming quotes. And
Mm-hmm.
it was kind of like a ask me anything type live. And so I tried asking if before they transitioned, if they had tried gender affirming care, but then it got complicated because I think they were interpreting that as gender affirming to their experience, whereas I was asking more gender affirming toward biological sex, like finding different ways to like try to feel more comfortable with what is natural to our bodies, and like trying to go more that direction. Like why, I guess my question would be like, why isn't that, or maybe it is more pursued and I'm just unaware of it, but like, why wouldn't that be more pursued, to say like, well, let's see if we can get you to identify with like what's fundamentally already here, and how, like, why is gender affirming care considered to affirm the opposite of the bodily sex?
Okay, I
Did I
got
phrase
you.
it? Did you follow?
Yeah,
Okay.
yeah,
Okay.
I got you.
Okay.
So, some people, so in my case, that was kind of the route that my parents took. So they were just kind of like, let's try to make you feel comfortable with the body that you already have. So, like I said, still not on testosterone, still not on anything. You know, my parents did allow me to get like the binders and everything, just because also realistically, even if I still did identify as female, my chest has been a problem for years, just
Mm.
because I was a very early bloomer, let's say. So it's always just kind of been a thing of like, can we please conceal this in some way? So um and some, you know, some people who do kind of first start feeling like maybe the body isn't right, they will try, you know, to wear certain clothing, or, you know, kind of try to like reconnect almost like with their biological sex. And it's not that it doesn't happen, it's just that it's probably not as public, I'm not going to lie, because trying to reconnect with a sex that you already feel so far from, even if it's your biological sex, it's really difficult. So for me, for this past year, I've been trying to reconnect with femininity, not necessarily trying to go back to being a woman, but just trying to realize that I can bring together masculinity and femininity to a point where I can feel comfortable in the here and now, even if I'm not wearing a binder every day, not doing masculine makeup every day, just so it can kind of help me get through the next few years until I'm on my own and can make those medical decisions for myself. But not everyone who is transgender, non-binary, whatever, can do that, because sometimes it just literally hurts them too much mentally to try and get gender affirming care to match what their biological sex is, because it just feels so wrong, and it just really does not match how they feel. And that kind of also plays into the fact of some kids even can recognize that from a younger age, and then it kind of increases as they grow, and by the time that they're like a teenager or 18, they can't have that gender affirming care that matches with the biological sex, because they've just known from such a young age it's wrong, something is uncomfortable here. And you know, usually someone, at least in my case, when I first kind of figured out like, okay, something's not right with the body here, I did not think I was immediately non-binary or transgender. I genuinely thought it was like a body dysmorphia kind of a situation. So I did take that time to kind of be like, maybe if I wear these kinds of clothes instead of these kinds of clothes, maybe I'll feel better about it. Tried that, didn't work. So, and other people will try that as well. And it can go the same for male to female or female to male. So yeah, that's what I would say. I would say it's not that it doesn't happen. It's either that it's just private, or it just didn't work out for that one specific person, because it just caused too much mental distress and pain.
I guess when I think of gender affirming care, it's because so when I was in probably eighth grade, ninth grade, I remember wearing boy sweatpants, what is it, etny hoodies. Like I was very into like the skater scene, even though I was not a skateboarder. But I had friends that were, and I was very much like I wanted to be like one of the guys. My parents definitely preferred my brothers and the sports that they played. There were a lot of different things that played into being like, if I was a boy, I would make things easier. And when I was young, my dad used to call me sir and be like, I'm not a sir, I'm a ma'am, stop, because it was
Yeah.
annoying, because it's like, I'm not my brothers, like, and I can't be them because I'm a girl. And so there was like this disconnect. But I think that I think of it more as allowing free expression of gender while maintaining, like, I guess, like, you say that the pronouns, and I'm just trying to understand, right? You say that the pronouns, changing the pronouns makes you feel more comfortable.
Mm-hmm.
And so I'm wondering, like, because for me, I could dress like a boy and cut my hair and still be like, well, I'm still a girl. I just prefer things this way. Like, why do pronouns need to change?
All right, so that's definitely a more complicated question. Because I would say I was kind of when I was younger, I was definitely a tomboy. My parents acknowledged that I was the kind of girl that would, instead of like being over by the fence and talking about boys, I'd be with the boys playing basketball, probably failing really badly because I could not play basketball, but that's not the point.
Yeah,
So,
same. Me.
but so I would say that when it comes to changing the pronouns, and this can even be related to changing the name, it's almost like you're erasing who you used to be. So for me, one of the most, important things I ever did was cut my hair. My mom never let me cut my hair. Like where it is at now, if I was like 6 years old and I had this haircut, she'd hit the roof. So, but on my 18th birthday, my best friend took me to the hair salon because I made the appointment. Didn't really give my mom much warning. I think I told her the morning of the appointment, hey, I'm getting my hair cut, mom, bye. And then we drove to the hair salon and I got all my hair chopped off. So that was kind of my first step in being like, okay, this person, insert my dead name, is no longer here. It is now Asher. This is who I am. And when it came to picking my name as well, I picked names that, or because I changed my first and my middle name, I picked names that had meaning to me spiritually and also had roots within my family's history. I'm personally adopted, but my family has Norse and like Irish roots. So I picked two names, Asher and Zephyr, that had roots to both of those. And then when it came to the pronouns, that was almost kind of like, I want to say like the final nail in the coffin, basically, of just kind of being like, I am a man, the person I used to be, this dead name, this person with long hair, super feminine. You would think that they were a girl no matter what. That person's gone. It's gone. Like, she's no longer here. She's no longer with us. I'm here. I'm a he, they. This is who I am now. And I think a lot of people within, and I cannot speak for them because I am not them, but I feel like that's kind of this, a similar maybe thought process almost, of just kind of like erasing who you used to be. And on top of that, by doing all of these changes, you can also kind of see who within your circle is going to be there for you through those changes, because those are very difficult to do. Cutting my hair was a huge thing for me. That's why I had my best friend with me. So, and then when I came to college, talking about my pronouns, my preferred name and everything like that, it was really hard for me to be like, yeah, if you see my dead name somewhere, don't call me by that because I will cry. So, um, it's very much a situation of like, it's a lot for us to go through as transgender people, to go through all those changes, but it's also a way for us to almost like make it valid that like, this is how we view ourselves. We've been through all this. So now you got to view us as this, because we've gone through all the mental struggle of it. You didn't have to go through it. We did. So please see us as what we see ourselves as, because it's also hard for us as transgender people to see ourselves as what we are. Like, there are still some days where I'm like, oh my gosh, am I really a guy? Am I really a girl? And then I'm just like sitting in my bed at like 4 a.m. when I should be asleep. But knowing that there were other people out there who have always supported me, who went through my name changes, because I changed it like 5 times, who went through me with who like stuck by my side with my pronouns and everything, just kind of made it valid that like, no, I am a guy. This is what I identify as. Who I was like 2 years ago, 3 years ago, is no longer here. I've taken the lessons that I've learned from when I was her, but now I'm him. And this is where I am now, and this is what I can take into the future. And I feel like a lot of people within the transgender umbrella kind of have that same idea, but once again, cannot speak for them because that's not my story.
When so I converted to Catholicism when I was 21, and I added Marie to my first name when I converted. And so before I was Catholic, I just went by Allie. And that was my name all through high school. I, you know, really made some really bad decisions in my life, publicly and privately and everything else, all through the time. And when I converted, and changed my name, I can identify like with what you're saying about, you're like leaving this old life behind. This is a renewed life. And probably for about 5 years, if anybody called me Allie, I'd be like, my name's Allie Marie. It's not Allie. Don't call me Allie. I can't do it. It was, I understand that feeling of like, and now that it's kind of like, okay, I have my identity within myself. Like I have my identity. Like I feel like my identity within Allie Marie is less about, I feel like my identity with Allie was probably more within myself, whereas my identity with Allie Marie is like an identity outside myself, like within God, if that makes sense. Like it's almost like an identity of submittal more than I'm going to choose to live my life on my terms. And so when I changed my name, it was very much I was very particular for so long. But now if I see somebody from high school that calls me Allie, or just doesn't know that I strongly prefer to be called Allie Marie, because it's kind of like that reminder of no, I'm like on this purification process. I'm like trying to be better. And some nights, I wonder if I should still be Allie and, whatever, but it's like, no, I am Allie Marie. I'm renewed. I'm there. I'm on this other path. And so I feel like with the name change, I definitely can understand how that shift happens, how when you're talking about somebody else calling you by that name, how important that can be just for edification, and even just a personal reminder of, oh yeah, this is who I am, and this is why I've chosen to be this way, and I can feel centered within that. So it's interesting though. And when I think about like transphobia, to say, you said one of the things about the people who stuck with you when you changed your name the 5 times and you kept kind of shifting your pronouns from here to there, that you knew that they were kind of in your corner. Like I feel like I personally would have struggled with that. If you and I had been friends, I probably would have been a little unable, and I would have just been like, I will just avoid pronouns for you. I will just call you they, them. If that, like, I don't feel like affirming one way or the other, because, I know that we have different philosophies, and that's a lot of what I try to do. If I'm unsure of somebody's pronouns, I stick with they, them. I had a little mishap the other day where I was with a non-binary person and my daughter, and my daughter wanted to be ahead of them. And I went to say, like, we always put Mr. or Miss in front of the first names of people. I was just like, go up in front of, I'm so sorry, which do you prefer? Like, and I like didn't know, and I kind of got caught up, and they ended up answering me. But it was just kind of like, I still do those honorary titles just because I think it clarifies that adult child relationship. Like I still think that even though we don't use last names anymore too much, but like I feel like I tend to go more toward that direction. But like some people will even say, oh well, that you're still not edifying, and so therefore you're transphobic. And it's just like, well, just because I don't agree, or I can't quite get onto the same philosophy, or like you said, there's kind of like that little thing in the back of every transgender person's mind where it's like they know what their biological sex is, but they're trying to be perceived in another way, where it's kind of like it's more about perception than unfortunately, like,
Going
I mean,
off of, yeah.
then like what is true, right? I mean, the way that you described it felt like like you want to be perceived in a certain way, but there's an acknowledgement of biological sex will always be the fundamental foundation, which I think is where Catholics a lot of the time end up getting caught up, because they're like, I don't like using some of the words that I see a lot of the time. People are like, oh, it's a delusion, or oh, it's this, or what's that. It's like, well, I don't know if it's like, I don't know if I would use those terms. I've never personally used them. I see them and I'm just like, I don't know. I don't know what, obviously there's like dysphoria. And is dysphoria a delusion, or is it just like an illusion? Maybe is a better thing.
Dysphoria is like, so the first thing I wanted to talk about, because you mentioned something, would be like, if we had been friends back in high school during that time when I was like, I don't know what the frick my new name is going to be. If you had like gotten mixed up or used a wrong name, I'm going to say the wrong name because there was 5, or use like they, them or anything, personally, I wouldn't have been offended, just because I had no clue what was going on either. So I would kind of feel like, you know what, we're in the same boat right now. You have no idea what's going on, and neither do I. So personally, I wouldn't have been offended. But that is me. And there are other transgender people out there who definitely need to hear their preferred name and their preferred pronouns. I am not one of those people. And I wouldn't even, and when it comes to those who do need to hear that, I think that's why it's more a situation of the people who are blatantly, openly being like, I'm not going to call you by that because I still see you as this. So, like, if someone had come up to me and been like, I don't see you as male, I still see you as female. I don't care what your pronouns are. I don't care what your preferred name is. I'm going to call you by your dead name and she, her. If they had blatantly said that to me, I'd be like, okay, you're being transphobic because you're just not caring at all. And you're not taking into consideration the impact it has on my mental health. Because you calling me that doesn't affect your mental health at all. It affects mine. So if that would be like a blatant, that would be like blatant transphobia. If someone had come up to me instead and been like, hey, I'm kind of struggling because I don't know what you want me to call you, like when in regards to your name or your pronouns. So like if I mess up a couple times, like I'm so sorry, but like I'm trying my best, but like you're figuring it out and I don't know what to do. I'd be like, hey, you're trying. And at this point, that's all that I can ask for. The amount of times I am almost given my dead name to a person who has never met me before is astounding. During a leadership program we were doing, we had to introduce ourselves. I am in a room full of people, parents and new freshmen, and I almost say my dead name in front of everyone. And I was like, so I'm Asher. So, it's, so I can make the same mistake too. So why would I go and get mad at someone if they called me she by accident?
It
So
seemed like you were probably a little more adaptable to that than a lot of transgender individuals that I have heard from in the past, that they would probably cut their parents out if they refused to identify with their new identity.
I also want to add that my parents weren't necessarily transphobic and homophobic from the get-go. So that also could be why other transgender people did cut their parents out, because it might have been a situation of like, not even like, we're not going to accept you. It could have been a situation of like, that individual could be in danger now. So it kind of, it depends. That's an extreme case, obviously, but it kind of depends on like the level of extremity and also just the household that you grew up in. Like I said, I grew up in a Catholic household, but it was very lax and it was very understanding, and my parents were way more accepting than my aunts, my uncles, my whatever. So
sure.
it was a different situation for me, and I kind of am just kind of, I think that's why I was able to be more understanding, just because it was like, they're accepting, they just really don't get it, so I'm just going to deal with it. So
I think, yeah, one of the questions that somebody asked me that I anticipate making a video about, it's they asked me in regard to the series that I'm doing, well, how would I define transphobia or how would I define homophobia? Because even as we talk, it's like I'm sitting here thinking, I'm like, well, fundamentally, I do disagree with pronouns changing. I do fundamentally feel that it is likely healthier for people to try to bring themselves back to their biological, like to somehow be centered so that everything can be cohesive in like a very again natural, because I'm always back to like, what is natural, what is like going to be
yeah.
like, if nothing felt disordered, if there was no anger, if there was no dissent, no trauma, like nobody yelled, nobody was mean, like, and because it's like, even being mean, I wouldn't call transphobic. Like for me, transphobic would be, we were at the event the other day and I see something non-binary and I'm like, oh my gosh, girls, no, okay, we have to go over and stand on this side of the store and like avoid the person and like, and just be like, that person, like they don't know anything about life. You need to just, no, we're not talking to them. Stay over here, and like, basically like I view that as transphobic, as being like, just not treating them as a person. Like it's like everyone is worthy of dignity and respect, and that doesn't mean that we're going to agree. Like if like if I were your parents, I would probably struggle. We'd probably be having the conversation regularly or something, or like, as long as there was a boundary, or like, I'd like to talk about this at this point, or, please, I'm definitely an open dialogue type parent and type person and everything else. And so, but I think that that's where I get hung up when people start saying, oh, well, you're homophobic or you're transphobic. Because I'm like, well, wait, no, that these are getting watered down, and it's actually making me really struggle to identify where could I possibly actually be being homophobic or transphobic. Because I think that when somebody says, oh, transgender individuals are going to be the downfall to our society, I think that's transphobic. Like, I think that that would be like a transphobic statement. I think that if somebody were those types of things where it's like, it's going to be their fault that this happened, it's going to be, and I do think that there's like a level of validity of the concern that some have for children, which is more where I come from anytime that I kind of talk about, like, because I'm very much about children's innocence. Like, I'm not a double standard. Like, my kids aren't downstairs watching Cinderella and the prince and the princess kissing. Like, we are not in any of that. Like, there is no romance in any of the shows that we watch. It is like Little Einsteins and, PJ Masks, all very, like, I'm not, we're having boy girl twins. The boy will not be in So Handsome type shirts or like ladies man, I'm not into that kind of stuff. It's like, ugh, no. And so like, I can say for me, like, it's like this across the board thing where it's just more like, I want to protect children. And I'm like, I don't like the idea of parental consent being removed, or like, and I feel like some of the agendas that are taking place, it's not the person in and of themselves, it's not transgenderism, but rather the agenda behind it. Like, and I have the same issue with Black Lives Matters. Like, I definitely agree that Black lives are important, and there are very serious discrepancies. I've talked about having, oh gosh, what's the payments back to them. All I can think of is the word reciprocity right now. That's not the word for it, but you know what I mean? Like where we paid the Japanese back for Pearl Harbor and whatever that is. Exactly. So having those types, but having the laws written properly so that they actually get to the people that they're supposed to get to, and all of these reparations, that's what they're called. Having the reparations in place. Like, I talked about that being important, but it's not that I don't believe that Black Lives Matter, because I 1000% do. It's the Black Lives Matter movement. It's the ideologies that are underneath the actual organization of it. And so when I think about the difference, I guess, for like transphobia, homophobia, things like that, I think there's a difference to say, as an individual, you have like, everyone has like this right. There's nothing I have personally against you. I think we believe different things and this and that. But then when it comes to like agendas and organizations that are like pushing for laws that would affect society, to say like, parents don't get to be involved with their child's medical stuff. Like, I mean, even at my doctor's office, once my girls turn 12, they can have their own chart and I can have zero access to it.
Yeah.
And like, that makes me nervous. Like, it's just like, but they're still under my roof, and like, we would still have open dialogue. And I anticipate that my kids would either just be like, yes, you can stay on it, or, but I just think about the different aspects of that. It's so hard. But I guess for me, that's probably where the differentiation is it's like, how are you treating the individual versus overall, like.
So I can kind of speak on that because, I mean, I am not a parent. I am 19, but I can kind of speak on that because of the relationship that I have with my mom. So when it comes to my doctors were the exact same way. By the time I was like 13 or whatever, they were just like, your mom doesn't have to be in the room. But I would always look at them and say, she can stay because she knows everything. And I don't care, like, I had nothing to hide from her. And like, I remember one time this doctor was like grilling me because she did not believe that I had like never smoked a cigarette, never had a drink before, never smoked marijuana. And I'm literally sitting there and I'm like, my mom's right here. Why would I lie to you? Like, if I lie to you, that means I'm lying to her, and then I'm going to get in more trouble. So, and she's just like, And she was like, do you want your mom to leave because, maybe you're just like not really being open? And I'm like, no, I'm telling the truth right now. I've never had a sip of alcohol. And I was like 18 at the time, because like, and I'm just like staring at this woman like, you're crazy. You don't believe me. My mom's sitting right there. If I had a sip of alcohol and she found out about it, I'd be out of the house. So,
Which is why she wanted your mom out of the room so you could be truthful with her.
exactly. But, and eventually my mom like did leave, and it was almost like both of us agreed, like, we just got to prove a point at this point. So
Right.
my mom left the room. The doctor looks at me, asked me the exact same question. She's like, have you ever smoked a cigarette? No. Have you ever smoked marijuana? No. Have you ever had a drink? No. And I'm just
Yeah.
like, the answers aren't going to change, So, and I can understand where that concern comes in, where it's just kind of like, okay, how much is too much restriction when it comes to the parents caring for their child, like on like a medical level. Now my dad used to work for a health company, right? So my parents were always involved in my health and my medical thing, and like I said, we had a very open dialogue when it came to, are you doing anything, have you taken anything, are you being stupid, so it's always kind of been a very open situation for me. But I also understand that not everybody else has that kind of situation. It could be because of trust reasons, it could be because of trauma, it could be because of who knows what. But I can understand, even though I'm not a parent, I can understand where that concern comes from, especially with someone like you who already has two kids, and now you have two more on the way. So, I get it, and I can respect that. What's more I think when it comes to, at least from my perspective, at least when it comes to a parent being involved, like personally, and I know that not all people within the community share this thought of mine. I just look at it because I've been with two people who were in health professions. I don't think that someone like a child should be on testosterone or estrogen or anything like that, just because I worry about how it would affect them later on in life when they actually start puberty. Because, but that's just my opinion. If I had a kid and they were like 17, 18, and they brought up the idea to me, I would be like, let's go to the doctor to figure it out, So I wouldn't say no. But if there's a 6-year-old child, I'm like, okay, well, this is a 6-year-old child.
Do you feel that, say, you're saying that you're not entirely, like a 6-year-old, but then what about a 12-year-old going on puberty blockers? Do you feel that there would be people in your community that would call you as a transgender person? Do you think that they would consider you transphobic if you were to say, I don't think a 12-year-old should go on hormone blockers or cross-sex hormones at that age because we don't know, like it still feels too experimental at this point or something like that?
So
Would they call
there
you
might
transphobic?
there's definitely a risk or a potential for that, and I fully am aware of that. So, both my partner and I want kids. So, and we would most likely be adopting or whatever. That's a later problem. So, but if I had a son or a daughter or a child come to me and at 12 years old and say, hey, I think let's say they were born as male and they think that they're female. They say, hey, I feel like I'm a girl. My immediate thought wouldn't be, all right, let's go to the doctors and get you on estrogen. It would be, okay, let's talk this through first, figure it out. We can work out pronouns, name, situation, and then we could get you some gender affirming clothes, gender affirming hair, something like that. But I wouldn't immediately jump to medication just because, it could be a situation of maybe they're just a guy who leads more feminine and they just don't get that yet. I want to let them see how it feels first, almost, to be a girl. Same thing would be if I had a girl who was like, I feel like I identify as a boy. I'd be like, okay, well, let's get you a gender affirming haircut. Let's get you some gender affirming clothes so that way you can feel more comfortable, because I want you to feel comfortable. If you have a preferred name or preferred pronouns, like, me and your mom will call you by that. And, we'll see how this kind of plays out for a little bit, and when I say play out, I don't mean like a week. I mean like a year or something like that. I would give it time so that way we could kind of work up to figuring out like, okay, And I would periodically check in with my kids and be like, okay, do you feel like you're still a guy? Do you feel
Right,
like
how
you
are you
still want to,
feeling? Hmm.
yeah, exactly. Or do you feel like maybe you're just a tomboy or a more feminine guy? Like, I would want that open dialogue with them, but I wouldn't immediately jump to medication just because, especially if they're at a young age, it's too experimental. And in my opinion, it's dangerous, you know? Like, it would be dangerous for me to be on testosterone now. So, you know, there are always risks that come with it. But, and, you know, there probably would be some people who would call me transphobic. And you know what? I'm okay with that. I'm perfectly okay with being called that, because the way that I would raise my kids if I was in that situation would be in a process that was more open than mine was, that was more accepting than my situation was, and I would make sure that they always felt like they could come to me if feelings changed. Same things goes for, you know, my partner, and if they wanted to go to their mom instead or anything like that. Like, both of us have agreed that, like, we would want to raise them in a way where they feel like they can come to us and talk to us, but we're not always going to jump to the extreme because we want to see how things play out. And if that labels me as transphobic, one, I would say it's disappointing, because, you know, all I'm doing in that situation would be caring for my kids' health and their mental health. But I also would say that, like, if I have to be viewed as transphobic simply because I'm caring for my kids in a way that's not jumping to the extreme right away, then I'm okay with that, because I would rather them be safe.
Are you, if you don't mind me asking, are you for or against legislature that would allow parents to jump straight to medication? Because you're saying what you would do, but I'm talking about legislature, because that's what people always bring it back to for me. They say, well,
Mhm.
are you voting against our rights? And it's,
Yeah,
you know, and
so
so like specifically somebody could say, well, if you think it's dangerous, if you think this, then, you know, well, you're not allowing somebody else who's in a different situation to make that choice for themselves. Like, at what
yeah,
point do you draw that line?
I think for me personally, if a legislator did come out with a situation like this, if I'm going to be completely honest, I don't know how I would vote, just because I could see both perspectives, but in the back of my mind, I would always be thinking, but what about, like, what will that affect in regards to their puberty, their brain functions, their bodily functions, any of that?
Bone density.
No, yeah, exactly. Like, will those affect it in a way where it can cause more damage later on? And would it be better to just kind of not jump to the extreme right away? Like I said, the only issue is that I could see both sides. I could see why
Yeah,
you would want to jump to the extreme and why you wouldn't want to jump.
right.
So if that came to me, genuinely don't know how I would vote. I think I'd be in a panic.
Because at that point you're trying to make the balance of which is more important, mental health or physical health. That's
Yeah.
really, you know, because that's what the argument would be on the side for somebody who would say, well, they should be allowed to take puberty blockers because that's going to help their mental health, and mental health usurps, it is more important than physical health, right? And
Hmm.
so that's what this whole the philosophical headbutting is coming to, that it's saying, well, what is more important? Is it physical health or is it mental health? Because, and where is that middle ground? And that's why, like, with the authoritative approach, we're trying to find that balance of, like, well, where do we draw that line of where is the mental health, where can it balance with the physical health, so that both can be in this happy medium, and it's not one extreme or the other where it's all physical health and we're ignoring mental health, or all mental health and we're ignoring physical health. Like, there has to be this balance, but it seems that our society is just cut to these extremes. And then there's like this, you know, it's like, well, if you don't think the way I do, then you're hateful. It's like, well, wait, no, I have reasonings and these pieces. And so I appreciate your perspective. I appreciate, you know, a lot, the whole gamut of perspectives, with the exception of when I'm just come at and without dialogue, right? Which I
Hmm.
understand for anybody, you know, where it's like, well, we're just not going to talk to them then, or we're going to be mean and condescending and, you know, and unkind.
It's definitely difficult to see what to do with the two extremes, and it probably will be, probably for the rest of however long this universe may last, because you know, there will always be two extremes to a side, and it's always very difficult to find a middle ground. And as someone who is in that middle ground, I fully acknowledge that there might be some people within the LGBTQ plus community who would disagree with me because, you know, they may lean more extreme, and you know, I'm perfectly okay with that. I would definitely say that my upbringing probably affected the way that I think, because like I said, my mom used to be a nurse, my dad worked for a health company, so I've always been in an area where yes, yes, mental health is acknowledged and it is important, but there needs to be a ground between the physical and the mental, because both affect the other. Your mental health affects your physical health affects your mental health. So that's the way I see it. So I can understand what you're saying with the extremes. I think when it comes to, pronouns and everything like that, it's definitely, that's a whole other thing to unpack, a whole other can of worms, because you have two extremes to that as well. But I definitely would say that, like, personally, as someone who is in the community, I wish there was a mutual ground, a middle ground. But as of right now, I think it's very difficult for there to be one, just because of how views differ. I also think, like your religion and how I view Catholicism, right? It's completely different. You find peace and serenity within it. I find nothing of the sort. I find that I want to run away. So, but, I think we are able to find a middle ground. We're able to have discussions and talk, and, it's usually very productive. And usually both of us at the end of it never feel as if one or the other has done anything that's like openly hateful. And I wish we could have more conversations like that just in general in the world, but because there are always the extremes, it's never going to really be that way. And like I think, just like I said, I'm more of a middle ground person because that's just how I was raised. And I usually say that the middle ground is probably the safest and probably the best until a better solution can be found. And usually those better solutions would take years to be found. So there's a point that I desperately want to find. There is that middle ground that I desperately wish I could, say, this is what we can do. But I just can't, because I can't see one. So, and I am transgender, I am queer, and I still can't see one, but hopefully in the future it will change. But for the time being, all we can do is, queer people are trying to raise their voices so that we're acknowledged, we're protected, and we're respected. And we can, and there should be more communication, in all honesty, between the queer community and other like religious communities, because I know that some Catholics, Christians, whatever, can incorporate the two, or even other religions can incorporate the two and make it harmonious. But most of the experiences, at least with most of the queer people I've interacted with, has not been like that. It's been pretty much like you're either Catholic and you ignore your homosexuality, your whatever situation, or you get out. So that's been the experience of mine and other queer people. But I wish it wasn't like that. I wish that there was that more middle ground. It's a work in progress. It's probably going to take years.
Well, it's been taking years. Yeah, it's always been a source of, I mean, even biblically, into the Old Testament, you still have the different, the differences have been around for the entirety of humanity. And so it's interesting to see it all. The Bible says that God is not the author of chaos or confusion. And so it's like interesting for me just to see that, because I think what I see most in a lot of different aspects, I was raised Protestant, wasn't raised Catholic. And when I came into Catholicism, I found stability. There was consistency, because I could look to doctrine and it's saying, this is what the church believes. And across the board, it's all cohesive. If you look outside of commentary, right? If you look at doctrine, if you look at the biblical interpretations of the text, there was consistency, and there was less confusion and less like
open ends,
like margin for error. Yeah, I guess is how I felt about it. And so I do think that there is a level of abandonment in general to self when Catholicism and Christianity is sought in its truest form. Like, and that's, I think that does include a level of gender identity, a level of sexuality, a level of, fasting is a spiritual practice. You have all these different things of like levels of abandon to self, to say my body is not the end all be all. And because, we've been talking about physical and mental health, but then we also have our spiritual health. And there's that other dynamic that also feeds into how are these things balancing together, because we are mind, body, and spirit entities. And so it's an interesting thing on how people can reach a place of security and like intrinsic identity and like intrinsic, you know, like where you wouldn't be relying on me to edify your existence and I'm not relying on you to edify mine. It's just, no, I know that what I'm experiencing, and it sounds like you're like at a place of peace with that, at least right now as it's coming across in our conversation. But, you know, to like find that within ourselves so that we're not looking for that external validation. We're not looking for, you know, and that does take time. You know, like I said, it was probably about 5 years that I, like, if somebody called me Allie, it's like, no, it's Allie Marie. We don't do Allie anymore, you know, and now it's just like somebody calls me Allie. I'm like, yeah, okay, you're shortening my name to that and it's whatever. But yeah, but so it's a journey and we're all on a journey. And I think that that's where, for me, like, I mean, obviously Christians are called to be either hot or cold and not lukewarm. But I think that the level of definition there is that, like, we're called to love Christ and we're called to love our neighbor. And we have to first and foremost love God, which means that, like, I would be rooted in the Bible and rooted in scripture and rooted in like rooted in that. But then in loving my neighbor, I'm always going back to Christ. It's like, well, how would, you know, so there's this like continuum of like, you know, do unto others as you would have them do unto you. And so we're trying to be kind and courteous and understanding and learning and growing in the ways that we understand the world, because this is a world like that, we're all going to be different. And I think it's just so important to, like, yeah, not run away from these conversations and to actually have them in a way that can be productive, you know, instead of like condescending, right, scream, like yelling, but not only yelling, but just like condescending, or like, well, I'm gonna make this statement and then you're gonna disagree with me, but I'm gonna make the statement again to like really make my point, you know, like, and I'm gonna say it in a way that's a little abrasive, but we can still continue talking, and it's just kind of like it's ineffective. So it's more, how can we have effective communication to actually understand where each other are coming from and where have we been, what has brought us to today. And so I appreciate you.
It's absolutely no problem, because I feel the same way. It's not easy to have these conversations, but they do need to happen. And I've had conversations in the past that have been abrasive. It has not gone well. So, and they have been political or religious, and they haven't gone well because nothing gets solved because the other person is yelling at me. So,
and then before you know it, you're defending something that you don't even support. Suddenly you're defending it's a 6-year-old going on hormones or something.
It's just
like
it's a mess,
yeah.
you know? So, you know, and like I said, by saying what I did say, even about that whole hormone things, I fully acknowledge that there are going to be people out there who don't agree with me, other transgender people and queer people. And I'm okay with that, just because I know personally where I stand right now. My middle ground, where I stand, focuses on the mental and the physical health. It's not because I don't want to be accepting. It's because I am thinking about their future and when the right time would be for us to go that medical route. And I'm okay if that makes me look one way. I definitely would say that I am not an extreme person. Like, I will advocate, I will scream at the top of my lungs, you know, for people to try to use the right pronouns, try to use the right name, be respectful of people's sexuality, you know, don't put your own input on it if you're not in there with them, if you didn't have to live through their trauma. I will scream that from the rooftops, but I will always try to not be rude or not be condescending or not do any of that, because I know that if I am A, B, C, or D, my message isn't going to get across. And that's what I want. I want the message to get across. And people, in my mind, don't return respect if they are not given respect. So I vote, you know, in that, you can even tie that if you want to the teaching, treat others, you know, do unto others as you want them to do unto you. So, and I'm not even Catholic.
You don't have to be. That is the golden rule. I think it's of 11 world religions. It's 7 or 11. They rhyme, so I can't remember. But that's the core golden rule of all of the major world religions. It's
do unto others as you would do unto yourself. Yes. So, and even when I left the Catholic Church, just because of my own personal trauma, that was the one thing that I took with me, because it always reminded me of, give others respect so that way they give you respect back, because then the conversation can happen. If you're yelling at them or they're yelling at you, no respect is being exchanged. So the conversation isn't going to go anywhere.
And I think for me, in the context of what you just said, like respect could almost be equated with give them the benefit of the doubt.
I guess you could say that. Yeah, absolutely. I mean, kind of took that, that dive off the cliff when I made my first TikTok video responding to you. So, and every conversation that we've had since then has been productive,
Mm-hmm.
So in some way, shape, or form, there are still some things that I probably will never understand or never get or wrap my head around, because whenever I look at the Bible, I will like look at a single page and be like, oh, look, there's 35 questions that I have from this single page. So, and that's just because I'm too inquisitive, and I'm
Well,
okay
that's
with
why
that.
I like this Bible right there. You want to see it?
Yeah, absolutely.
It's my favorite Bible ever. I use it all the time. It's the Ignatius Catholic Study Bible, New Testament, but it was written by
Ooh,
Scott Hahn. He's
okay.
he
Oh, I've
did
heard
all
of
the
him.
he did all the commentary. So basically, here are your 2 pages, right? I
Yeah.
didn't, but like basically, this is scripture, and then all of
Yeah.
this is all the explanation of the scripture.
Oh,
Like they
wow.
have word studies and stuff. But so literally, whenever anybody will bring up a Bible verse to me, typically this is a New Testament. Whenever anybody brings up a Bible verse to me and they're like, oh, well, what about this verse and what it says? I literally just open that Bible and I'm like, well, here's the commentary and here's the answer as to why the church teaches what she teaches on that,
Yeah.
And so it's like, that's what I find peace in the Catholic Church of, right? Because you're like, oh, I look at that and I see all these questions and it's like, yeah, I saw that too. And so I like saw it and I found those answers because I drilled priests. I drilled so many people to be like, this doesn't make sense. These 2 verses conflict each other. This is going on here and that's going on there. And this doesn't make any sense. And like, but ultimately they always had the answers if I was asking them. And so like, that's one of the things that just, I don't know. That's like what gave me peace was like, oh, these answers do exist somewhere.
Yeah.
So
I think I also, I think that the reason why I'm also so inquisitive is because I also look at it as like, okay, are the answers that are given in regards to when this was first written, or can these answers also be applied to the modern day, because the modern day is changing and expanding and everything. So it's like, can you apply the past to the old? I mean, the old to the new. I can't talk.
right.
So I think that's also where some of my questions come from, just because it's like, I'm sure that there are some teachings like that one that we mentioned that can be applied both then and now, but there are also some other teachings where I'm like, okay, but like if that happened now, like we'd be screwed. like this would not work if this was in the modern day era. I don't know if that's a good idea, but like, and even if there is even if the question was answered, I'll still be like, okay, but like I don't know if a flood is a great idea, not at this time or in this economy. So, but so it's always just like,
Sure.
Can you relate the past to the now, and can it be related to the future? And I'm sure that there are some that can. I'm sure that there are some that can't. And that's most likely why I have all the questions. Lord knows with whatever happens in the afterlife, if I get to heaven, because I don't know, Lord knows God's going to be like, I'm going to have a 5-hour conversation with you because you have way too many questions.
I think he would love to sit down with you and chat. I think he would welcome it.
He'd probably just be like, why did I have to make this person question so much? And then I let them watch Criminal Minds.
Oh gosh, no.
Why did I make this being so inquisitive? What did I do? And I always think about those interactions that could potentially happen, because like I say, I'm not Catholic anymore, but if I did have an interaction with God or Jesus, it'd probably be freaking hilarious.
Sure.
They would be like, wow, you really just said no, and now you have like 15 million questions. All right, let's go get a cup of coffee.
Yeah.
It's because we're gonna need it. So, I always make those jokes because it's like, I have my own trauma, but like my trauma was caused by the people, not by whoever those entities are. I just have too many questions for my own good. And I acknowledge that. But, I've just kind of accepted that at this point.
Well, it was really good to get to chat with you today.
You as well. I definitely enjoyed this.
Yeah, I really appreciate it. I learned things about you. There were certain stances I didn't even know about you, and was told, whatever direction the conversation, I know we talked beforehand about just whatever direction the conversation goes, we'll just kind of follow that. So I appreciate you kind of bearing with me with my questions as I kind of tried to
Of
formulate
course.
them. But yeah,
No
no, I
worries.
appreciate your time.
I appreciate yours as well, because I know that you have a very busy household.
No, I'm
So,
happy to chat. Yeah. So thanks for tuning in. This has been The Authoritative Approach, where love and boundaries meet. We've been chatting with Asher about their experience as a transgender individual in modern day society. And I do pray that you guys have a great day. Please leave your questions in the comments, and we will look forward to reading and responding there. Have a great day.